now, the author of the book Chocolate Pudding in Heaven, the intriguing journey of my bipolar mind. It is a great read. It's funny, but it's not. There's a lot of great information and the story of her experiences. Very page turner. Very, very good. I recommend it. Maggie is funny, but she's also serious, and she's very open. She has her BA in International Relations and an MA in Adult Education. But she got her start as a stand-up comedian in the Bay Area in 2003, where she was winning comedy awards. She was working at comedy clubs, corporate events, and charity functions. But then came along 2011, she decided it was time to be more open about her own life and her own private battle living with bipolar 1 disorder and her hospitalization at age 16, the severe manic episode, and her extremely difficult journey to recovery and stability. So she decided that she was going to transcend the stigma, transcend the limitations of the diagnosis, and live the life that she chose. So she's been doing just that and learning about what works for her, and now proud of what she went through, who she is, and she's inspired to share what she's learned and her story with us. So let's give Maggie, Nami Santa Cruz, welcome.
Woohoo! Okay. Thanks, everybody. Oh my gosh. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm going to put this back on the screen so I can see you guys. I am so excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me. I spoke to this group about maybe 2.5, 3 years ago, and we just had such a great time. So I was so happy to come back and talk to you guys. So just to tell you a little bit more about myself, my name is obviously Maggie Newcomb, and I'm a mental health advocate, and I speak about my lived experience living with bipolar 1 disorder. I've been hospitalized 3 times with severe manic episodes and psychosis. My first hospitalization was at 16, so I'm coming at you with 26 years of experience living and treating mental illness. I've definitely had my ups and downs, and I don't have all the answers, but I know that there's hope. And that is one of the things that I'm really trying to get that message out there, that there is hope and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And you just don't hear that very often when you watch the news or watch movies. It's always usually very negative. And so I'm trying to get that message out as much as I can. So it's great to be with NAMI, great to be with my people. I'm a member of the Stop Stigma Sacramento Speakers Bureau. So I've spoken all over Sacramento at different organizations. Currently, I'm an assistant director for a nonprofit that handles healthcare education for union workers. So I have a full-time job, and this is what I do on the side because I'm just so passionate about this subject, which is why I love talking to you guys, because I know you are too. So I have to tell you guys an interesting story about the last time I saw you. Raise your hand if anyone was there. I'm just curious if people were there. Okay, cool. This new virtual thing is so interesting because as a comedian, we feed off of the energy of the crowd. And so with the Zoom, I don't get it. So I'm having to laugh at my own stupid jokes. So I'm taking one for the team. I'm going to laugh at my jokes tonight, and I'm going to pretend that you are laughing with me. So I see some claps. Great. So last time I came, it was raining that night as well. And I live in Sacramento. So I took the day off, and my husband and I came down to Santa Cruz, and we had just gotten a beautiful dog, a German Shepherd, at our local shelter named Hank. And so we didn't know what to do because it was raining, but we have a detached garage in our backyard. So we left him outside and he could hang out in the garage. We felt bad for leaving him, but we knew that we couldn't leave him inside yet. So we drove to Santa Cruz, and I never really know what to expect when I'm going to speak at an organization. I thought, oh, maybe there'll be 30 or 40 people there. And I think it was standing room only, and it was totally a full crowd. And I was just blown away by how loving your community was. And I just felt the energy. My husband was so excited, and we brought books, but I wasn't really expecting to sell any. That's not really why I wrote the book, but we ended up selling and making about $350 with books. So we came in not expecting anything, and we drove home that night, and we were just kind of on this high, just felt so good to be with such a great community. We had this extra $350, feeling good. And we get home around midnight. We both have to work the next day. And we go out into our backyard, and our dog, Hank, looks a little guilty. And so we look at the side of our house, and we have a crawl space where there's that grate. He had pulled the grate off of the house, totally destroying the grate and destroying part of the section of the house because he pulled it off. And because we have a sump pump under our house because it was raining, he went down there, heard the sump pump, pulled the sump pump out, and must have flung it around the yard, and it was in different pieces, and it was totally destroyed. And I looked at my husband and I said, how much damage did he just do? And he said, about $350. So we're sitting there at midnight. We just had to kind of laugh because that's what life is, You get one great thing and then something else comes, and it's just kind of how life is. And so we had to laugh that night because we didn't really know what else to do. But it all turned out okay because my husband actually knows how to fix things. So he was able to fix it. He fixed the grate, and we were okay. And Hank turned out to be a lovely dog. If you guys follow me on Instagram, I'm obsessed with Hank and German Shepherd. So that all turned out good. But I have to say, what we're going through right now, it's sometimes really hard to find the light, to find the laughter in what we're dealing with. We have the pandemic, people are losing their lives, their livelihood, social injustice. And I know you guys in Santa Cruz were dealing with the fires. And I think there's just with COVID, this layer of anxiety that we just kind of like all feel because we're trying to make the best decisions we can. And so it's kind of tough times, and it's hard to find it. And I think a lot of you guys on this call know the mental health statistics. 1 in 5 people live with a mental illness. And so that's 20% of our society that is dealing with a mental illness. Then you add this on top of it, and a lot of people are struggling. And so a lot of organizations ask me to come talk about mental illness, and it's like, how do we even start? Like, where do we start this conversation? So what I have found is really important with mental illness is to first ground the conversation in compassion and empathy. And the reason why that is so important is that especially those of us on the call that live with a mental illness is having compassion for ourselves. That this sometimes it's such a difficult time that we can't do the stuff we want to do anymore, and we have to just be nice to ourselves. Compassion for those that are caretaking those that live with a mental illness, because a lot of times those caretakers don't get as much attention as if it was a physical illness. And so we have to have compassion for those people as well. Compassion for those practitioners. It's such a difficult illness to have that we just need to start there, because that will really guide us. So starting with compassion. And then the next part that I can't believe I have to say this, but we have to ground it in science. And I know it's 2020, but I shouldn't have to say this, but it's so important to remember that mental illness is a medical condition. It's not a personality disorder. It's not because somebody is lazy. It's not a choice, but it's something that is treatable. And it's really important for me to get that message out, because I think there's just so much stigma surrounding mental illness. And so people think, well, maybe I just have to try harder. And that's not it at all. It's a mental and physical medical condition that is treatable. And so that's really important for me to get that message out, because even in the news, I think, I don't know if you guys ever heard a news reporter say this, but an actor was dealing with depression, and the newscaster said, oh, they're battling those demons. He's battling the demons. And it's like, this is 2020. We're saying that someone's battling demons. Like, come on, like this is that, those kind of messages is what causes the stigma to continue. So that's why it's important for us to remember the compassion, science, facts, wisdom, because that will just help us make the right decisions when it comes to mental health, and learning more. I have to share this book that I'm reading. It's not my book, but if anyone that wants to learn more about bipolar disorder, it's Bipolar Disorder, A Guide for Patients and Families. And it's a Johns Hopkins Press book. So I started reading this, and it really helped me. There's a lot of things I didn't know about bipolar disorder. And I'm sure we can put it in the comments too as well. I don't make any money off of them. I should contact them. But he really had a lot of great information about bipolar disorder. And one of the statistics that was in there that I was not aware of is that around 15% of those that live with bipolar disorder will die by suicide. That shocked me, because it wasn't just attempt suicide, but who will die by suicide. So that means that those of us living with bipolar disorder have to really make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and that we take the illness seriously, because those statistics are real. And the other thing that the book talks about is that I've seen this vary, but around 2 to 3% of our society lives with bipolar disorder. And that's important to understand, is so that means there's a lot of us out there. But what I think is most important is that bipolar disorder will present differently on everybody. So how it looks on me might be completely different how it looks on somebody else. And so that's something to keep in mind. And another thing that's important is that we don't compare each other. Well, that person, that happened to them. Why is this happening to me? And I think it's really important that we don't compare how we recover. And I know that's something that I'm working on all the time. I know there's a lot of really cool mental health advocates on Instagram that I'm like, gosh, they're way cooler than me. They have a way better story. And they're much better at taking pictures of themselves in better light than I can do. So I think that's really important, that mental illness it really varies from person to person. So we don't want to put people in boxes, and really understand that we are each on our own mental health journey, and that we need to stick to our journey and our treatment and what works for ourselves. Because what I found for me is that it's really about finding what works for me, working with my psychiatrist, and then finding what works for me. I live with bipolar 1 disorder, so I can go for like years of stability, and I take an antidepressant and antipsychotic to keep me in this kind of normal range. And it's really important that I stay on my meds, because they kind of give me the foundation so that I can pursue happiness. My antidepressant doesn't make me happy, doesn't make people like me more, doesn't make me good at my job. It just keeps me stable so that I can do the things that make me happy. So that's why right now it's really important that we're really paying attention to our medication and staying med compliant so that we can handle the storms as they come. I know that when I first had my first episode at 16, it started with depression in my late junior high years. And then when I was 16, I had a severe manic episode with psychosis. And mania is a very difficult thing to describe. The way that I was experiencing it was that I was somehow connected to some enlightenment, and I was having all of these thoughts and feelings and racing thoughts. From my parents' perspective, it was that I was not making any sense, that I was completely detached from reality. So that was how bipolar disorder manifested in my family's life. And it was so bad that I had to be hospitalized. And so that's kind of what led to my treatment, is that hospitalization is what helped me get the treatment that I needed. So they were able to find the right meds. I was stabilized. And then what happened was I went right back to school. And that can happen a lot when you get diagnosed and you are recovering. Sometimes we try to go right back to our life before we're fully recovered. So I went right back to school and I had another episode. But then I was hospitalized, I was stabilized again, and they finally found the right medication combination that worked for me. And at that time in my life, I felt so much shame. I was so confused at what had happened to me. I felt like I ruined my life. I feel like I ruined my family's life. When they gave me that diagnosis, it was very grim. And this was back in 1994. They told me that I probably wouldn't go to college. They told me that I would have to stay back a grade. They told me that I might not live on my own. So it was very grim. And that was the time of life that my family we had to really come together and work on finding a solution together, because it just seemed like there was no hope. So what we did was I made that decision at that point that I would follow the directions of the doctor, because I did not want to go back to the hospital. I wanted to do anything to not experience the pain of an episode again. So I made the decision to take the meds and follow the treatment. And that was my decision, because I wanted to have the dreams that I wanted. I still had dreams. I wanted to go to college and do what I wanted. So because my family came together, we made the choice to treat the illness. I was able to go back to high school, finish high school. I got into UC Davis. I went to Davis. I was on the women's crew team. I was able to do a semester abroad in Spain. I graduated. I did an internship in Argentina, all the while treating my mental illness. And it was because I put that work into it that I was able to do those things that I wanted to do. And then when I was 26, I did have a relapse, even on medication. And that's something to know, that even when you're med compliant, even when you're doing everything, you can still have a relapse. And so I was hospitalized again. And that hospitalization is really what my book is about. It was really important for me to show people what the journey looks like to go from feeling like a normal person into mania and psychosis. I really wanted people to know what it feels like, and that most importantly, you can come out of it, because there's just so much stigma about the term psychosis. It's usually used in such a negative way. And it's associated, thanks to Alfred Hitchcock, it's associated with some really violent stuff. And I was never violent. I was never, ever violent. And so I was only out of reality. And so it was really important for me to show people that you can have a manic episode with psychosis and come out of it. And so that's what I talk about in the book. My book, my husband is making me do this. He always says I don't advertise myself enough. So this book, this is my book. So I really talk about my second episode a lot more in detail than I am doing now. And after that episode, I was on disability for a year. Didn't know if I was ever going to go back to work again. But that's when, again, my family came together. And like I said, I was back in a really dark place. And that's when, so at that point, the meds weren't enough. I was taking my meds. I was seeing my psychiatrist, but I didn't felt like I was going to come back to where I was. And that's where I had to develop what I think I'm having to work on now with the pandemic, and that's patience. Patience to know that it is going to get better. And I also had to develop like a better perspective, a perspective that my current circumstances did not define who I was at that point. And also I had to find purpose. And the purpose that I found was stand-up comedy. I needed to find something that brought me joy. Because what happens a lot of times when you're trying to recover from an episode is that it just feels like it's taking forever to get back to where you were. And I remember feeling like, am I ever going to get back to where I was? So that's when I started to do stand-up, and just doing anything that distracts you, that makes you feel joy is so important, especially right now. And then, like I said, having the perspective to know that I was going to get through this. And so eventually I did, and I came out of the mania and psychosis. I started doing stand-up comedy, started actually winning. I won a competition. I started, emceeing and doing really fun shows. And then eventually I decided that I was able to go back to school, and I got my master's degree. And then eventually I started a new career. But all those things took time, took patience to get from one thing to the next. And I did have these wins, but they were very slow. And so I eventually got a new job. I met my husband, who's right outside this door. We bought a house a few years ago. And I've really thrived in the past few years, but it was because I made the decision to stick with my treatment and then be patient with it as I found the things that brought me joy. So I think, kind of is like, what can I learn? What can we learn from my story, and kind of like, where do we go from here? Something that I talk a lot about at groups is, where do we go right now in this kind of really difficult time? And so that goes back to us taking care of ourselves, and putting our mental health as our number one priority. And that's something that I've done for the past 26 years, despite all my ups and downs, is that I made my mental health my number one priority. So whatever that means for you, whether it's making sure we get enough sleep at night, making sure you're seeing your primary care doctor, your psychiatrist. If you take them, make sure you're taking your meds. And then also finding things that bring you joy. Maybe there's a good Netflix show that's making you happy, or maybe you have an animal. I have my dog Hank. Or maybe you send a text to a friend. Hey, it's been a while. Let's maybe talk on the phone or something. Maybe going for a walk. So it's these times that we have to really put more attention to our self-care, to be patient and finding the joy in our lives where we can. Because just as I decided back then that my current circumstances were not going to define me, right now where we're at with the pandemic and the difficulties we're having, I don't think this is defining who we are as a nation, as a community. And I really believe that we're going to get through this, that we're going to get through this together. And so we have to support each other, especially in the next few months, because we're going into winter and it can get a little tough. So this is where we really have to support each other. And so that we can all find the stability, so that we can find our joys and find our passions. Because for me, I don't just want those living with a mental illness to find the light, as we were talking about. I want them to be the light. I have so much passion that I really want those living with mental illness to be the best version of themselves. A lot of times in mental health treatment, they always talk about, oh, we just want you to be stable. We want you to get through this. I want more. I want people living with mental illness to not just find stability, but to thrive. I want those living with mental illness to whatever they dream possible. I want, them to be the CEO. I want them to be the elected official. I want them to be in the room when we're making decisions about mental health stuff. That's my purpose, is that those living with mental illness can be the best version of themselves. But the only way to do that is to first find stability and find the light. You have to take that first step. So I think right now, kind of like what we're going through, it's fuzzy because there's just so much noise right now with politics and everything. So I think it's like, if we can just slow down, take care of ourselves, take care of each other, find things that bring you joy, that's when the light comes through. And it's going to flicker a little bit, probably in the next few months. It's going to flicker, but that's okay, because we are going to get through this and you are going to find the light. So where am I? 707. Okay. So I kind of went through my story pretty quickly, but I kind of wanted to leave time for questions to see if anybody has any questions or anything that has come up.
If you do have questions, you can type them in the chat, or you can speak aloud if you have any.
I'd like you to tell us something. Can you tell us why you named your book Chocolate Pudding in Heaven, and a little bit more about that experience?
Yeah, so the book is about my episode when I was 26, and that episode came with, it started with mania, and then it turned into psychosis. And when I was in psychosis, I believed that I was deeply connected to God and that I was actually going into heaven. And so that is actually a very common thing that I've heard with a lot of people living with disorder, is that a lot of people feel like Jesus is speaking to them, or some kind of, they're experiencing some sort of enlightenment. So that was the feeling that was so strong for me. And so when I went to the mental hospital, I thought that in my head, I was like, oh, this is like God's waiting room where I'm about to go to heaven. So I was totally cool with going to the mental hospital, but it obviously was not heaven. It was a mental hospital. And so the chocolate pudding was really good there. So that's where the title came from. And I really like chocolate. So yeah, that's where that came from.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, perfect. So I have a question about how would a person support, let's say you talked about being a 16-year-old, finding out your diagnosis. How would somebody support that person? They're saying, I don't want to hear from anybody. I want to be left alone. The phone calls, the letters, the emails are just too much. So do you stop or do you continue?
And you don't have to answer this, but can I ask how you know the person? And if that's too much, I can do a general answer.
It's an acquaintance.
Okay. So this is the number one question that I get when I talk to people, is every single time I talk to someone, I get this question, because people feel really helpless when you see someone that's suffering, that probably has a mental illness, and they are not wanting to get treatment. So I kind of feel like there's levels of that question. And what I mean by levels is how close you are to that person. So for me, when my manic episode came when I was 26, I did not want treatment either. But I have a mother and a sister that I'm very close with and I trust, and they kind of swooped in, and they were kind of like, no, you're getting treatment, because we already had a close relationship. So it depends on the relationship. And so A lot of times family members can be a little bit more, I'm going to say, encouraging, or they could literally like take them there if they'll trust them. So it's really important to build trust in your relationships so that if something does happen, they will trust you to get help. It's really hard when it's not family or very, very close friends, because that's when it gets really difficult. Because if the person doesn't want to get help, it's really hard to force them. I know I even have people in my life that I wish would get treatment. And so I think that maybe stepping back and the compassion, and I think all you can do is keep saying, hey, I'm here for you. I want you to get help. I'm here for you. And so I think all we can do is try, but that is the number one question that I get. And it's really hard to make someone get treatment if they don't want to get help.
Thank you.
I do have a question in the chat. Someone is sharing, I have a son who is currently conserved by the county public guardian. Do you have any suggestions of how I can support him? I'm supporting him by visits out of county and trying to be proactive in advocating for his physical health.
I think exactly what you're doing is visiting him. And the most important thing is, and I know you're probably doing this in everyone's, is that you're showing that person that you care and that you love them. That is something that I actually could feel from people when I was really struggling. I could tell who was authentic and who was not. And so just being there for that person, even if you're not sure if you're saying the right thing, is showing that you love them is what is the most important. And they will feel that. And maybe they can't tell you that now, but when you're in recovery, you can feel the love that people give you. So continuing to advocate for them, visiting them. And I think the most important, I can't remember, I think obviously it's your son, is to make sure that the treatment is consistent and really help to make sure that that treatment is happening and is consistent, because it's the treatment when it's serious is the most important thing too.
Thank you, Maggie. Can you speak to your experience at school after your first 2 episodes? Was there anything or anyone in place to support you? And if not, what would have helped?
That's a great question. So my first 2 episodes were when I was 16 and I was in high school. And then my 3rd episode when I was 26 and I was an adult. So when I was 16, I had to drop out of school. And so that was really hard. And I'm sure for whoever is dealing with that, when you drop out of school, that's really hard. So the support that I got from my family was that I was able to go to summer school. And so there are a lot of times there's alternative approaches. If you have to drop out of school, there's alternative schools you can go to. And so that was kind of my experience, is that I was removed from the situation. And that was actually the best thing for me, was to be removed from the school situation so that I could recover on the side. And that is kind of another principle that I talk about, is that if you have an episode, is that you want to make sure that you recover before you go back into whatever it is you just left. So the best thing for me to go back to school was taking the time away from school to find stability. And then I was able to go back. So that's kind of where like the patience comes into. Could you read the question again too? Because I want to make sure I answered it, because it was a long question.
They ask, can you speak to your experience at school after your first 2 episodes? Was there anything or anyone in place to support you? And if not, what would have helped?
Yeah, so that was my family, because I was 16 and my mom made sure that I took my meds. I wasn't forced, it was my choice. But what my mom did was she taught me how to make medication part of my daily life. So she had the pill case and she would make sure that I took my meds every day. And then eventually it became my responsibility. but it was my parents that taught me how to make treatment a part of my life. And so that was really important. And then because of that treatment, I was able to go back to school.
Someone shares, my daughter is 17 and experiences hypomania. Our trust is good, meds are working, and she is applying to university. But how did you and your family feel comfortable with you going off to college?
That's a good question. My family was always promoted. My mom they always wanted us to leave the house anyway. So for our whole life, they were always telling us, you're gonna have to go away to college because you need to get experience away from us. And that was just how they felt like that was really important for us. And so as far as the trust and making it happen, I was able to exhibit that I was stable enough to be on my own. And it was something that I really wanted. I wanted that experience to be away from my family. For me too, it was also a way to start over, that I didn't have to be this, mental patient that people knew in high school, that I could start over at college and have a new beginning. It was a really fresh start for me. So for me, it was a really good experience to be away. And my episode had happened maybe 2.5 years before. So I already exhibited that I could be stable enough. And one other thing I want to add, that for people that are going back to school, that it's really good to have a lighter load. That was another thing that was really, I think, contributed to my success. When I went to college, my first year, I had the lightest load that I could to make sure that I could complete my first year successfully. So I kind of put all of my thought process in my stability. So that just became my focus, was my stability, so that I could complete college.
During COVID, I've watched Homeland and Silver Linings Playbook, both of which feature a main character with bipolar disorder. If you've seen these, do you feel these were realistic portrayals, or are there other films that are more representative of your experience?
That's a great question. I love talking about movies and stuff. Silver Lining Playbook is probably my favorite out of all of the movies. It was the first movie that I really resonated with me. And I remember I sat in the theater with my husband and cried, because Hollywood has not done a great job of really showing characters their mental illness in a true way. And the reason why I don't like when mental illness is the main subject, if you watch Silver Lining Playbook, each character has a little something that they're dealing with. Like he's the main character, but they all are struggling with some sort of mental issues. Because I think everybody is struggling with some sort of mental health issue. So I highly recommend Silver Lining Playbook, just because it's very subtle. I feel like Hollywood always overdoes stuff. As far as Homeland, I have not watched it, and I don't know why. I think I probably should. I feel like Hollywood they're always extreme. Like either you're this brilliant CIA operative, or you're some evil character. There's no kind of middle ground, and that's why I love Silver Lining Playbook. That it wasn't so dramatic, that it was just everyday life, because I want to make mental illness just more everyday, that it doesn't have to be an extreme example, because there's thousands and millions of people that just want to have a life and they have a mental illness. They don't want to be in extremes.
How different were your episodes when you were 16 versus 26 in terms of your relationship with your parents? Did they play the same role, or was it different 10 years later?
That's a great question. They played a similar role, but a little bit different. So when I was 16, when you're younger, your parents make all the decisions. So they made the choice to take me to the hospital, and then afterwards, they kind of were like, okay, you're going to take these meds, and they're kind of helped me with those decisions, and guided me much more when I was 16. When I was 26, I was an adult and living on my own at that point. And so they kind of came in and made sure that I was hospitalized, but afterwards they tried to take care of me for a while, but I didn't like it. And so I actually had to start being on my own. And that was really hard. But it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, is that my parents were like, we're going to support you in your mental health treatment, but we're not going to, my mom kept telling me, you need to eventually get a job. So my mom was very supportive, but she was also very realistic. So once I started stabilizing, my mom was like, you're going to need to get a job eventually. You're going to need to get a job eventually. And she kept telling me that. And so eventually I was able to live on my own. So I think that when you're a teenager, your parents are much more guiding you, taking care of you, feeding you. And then when I was an adult, they were the initial support, but eventually I had to go on my own. They had to kind of release me and let me be on my own. But that was me, and sometimes it could take longer. It could take longer for people to be on their own.
Can you cite particular triggers that were responsible for your past manic episodes?
Yes, stress, absolute stress. And I think stress is difficult for everybody, and some stress is normal. That's what a lot of people are saying. That doesn't necessarily, not all stress is bad. The kind of stress that was really bad for me was the kind of stress that was more negative stress. Not the kind of stress like, oh, we have all these fun projects, but stress like negative stress. So when I was in high school, I was taking on too much. I was playing like 3 sports. I was in just over my head. And the thing about stress, it wasn't like a couple weeks. It was like a couple months worth of stress of taking on too much. That was kind of my thing, is I took on too many projects and too many things. And then when I was 26, I had a job that was very stressful. It was in kind of like sales. And so the responsibilities of the job were too much, and I took on too much again. And so those are my triggers of doing too much, but everybody has their own triggers.
How did your family keep you safe after your episodes? How were you able to heal at home?
I think that we kind of just took it slow. So it was like after I'd come home from the hospital, it was just like, okay, so, maybe let's watch some movies, maybe let's, very much in recovery mode right afterwards, because I think they wanted to make sure I was safe and I felt comfortable right after the episode. And then it was kind of important to develop a schedule. So, we're going to go for a walk at this time. Okay, this is the time that we're going to eat lunch. Okay, this is the time that we're going to eat dinner. So I think it's creating a kind of like a healing atmosphere where it's the feeling of kind of, I don't know what the right term is, but knowing that it's going to be okay. And so just creating like a more safe environment, not judgmental. That's one of the things my parents did that I think was really great, is that they never made me feel bad about what had happened. They never were like, oh, I can't believe you did that. They always knew that I was sick. And I remember, I put this in the book, my mom would sit with me at night right after the hospital, and she would say, right now you're injured. You're like an athlete and you're injured, and you're going to get better, and you're going to get through this. And that always stuck with me, because it was like, I always felt, with the mental illness, that I was so ashamed of the stigma. And my family really made me see that it was that I was sick, but I would get through it and I would get better. And I did.
We have a participant, Rita. She wanted to ask her question out loud. You can go ahead, Rita.
Okay, hi, Maggie. I wanted to ask you about our daughter. She's 40. lives away, a couple hours away from us, and she's a single mom. 3 months ago, she asked us to basically stop texting and communicating with her. She took me off of Instagram and texting. I think she blocked us from our, phone numbers. So we want to know, like, do we follow her lead and do as she's asking, or we're just sort of like, okay, what do we do here? And we know that she's been diagnosed with ADD and OCD since 14 years old. She moved away, got married early, 23 years old, had 2 kids, and then got divorced some years later. So now she's a single mom, and she's 40. So with all due respect, it's a little bit different because she doesn't live with us. We can't bring her back home. And the father lives in the same town, so they co-parent together. So we know that she needs help. And someone asked me recently, I mean, it was this today earlier, said, well, has she had a recent diagnosis? So I don't know if she has bipolar. I just know today from what I've known in the past. She does see a psychiatrist. She's always seen a therapist, and she's always been really good about wearing her retainer and being responsible with prescriptions. So I know that she's just a fanatic, with putting her retainer, not retainer. Is it a retainer? Yes. After you have braces, your mouthpiece, whatever. She's just so fanatic about things like that and being really responsible. Well, I would guess 100% that she's taking her prescriptions. It may not be the right prescriptions, but anyway, right now she doesn't want anything to do with us. And there's been a big blame game and, that stuff. So where do we go from here as a parents?
Well, first, I'm really sorry to hear that. That must be extremely painful. And I've seen this happen a lot, actually, in many families. And, people have different, I think because I was diagnosed so early and got treatment right away, that I knew that I couldn't refuse it. And I chose to work with my family. But some people have they maybe don't know how to accept it or don't know how to accept help. So they sometimes can push people away. I don't know if there's a one right answer to your question. I think that it's apparent for parents to keep telling their kids that they love them and they want to support them and they want to be there with them. I think just to continue that messaging so it's consistent and not giving up on that. Another thing that I tell people, because I've experienced this too with other people, is it's also a really good idea, and I don't want to pry into your life, but sometimes it's really good for parents to also see a therapist or a counselor, because if they're working with a professional, then that professional might have a better understanding of what the child is going, or the daughter is going through. And then you can kind of develop a plan where maybe you could say, okay, this is what we're going to try now and see what happens. Okay, try something else. Because it's really good to work with a professional that understands the child's illness and then can work with the parents so that they can figure out the next step. So it's a hard situation because you need that person to change and they're not changing. So the only thing you can do is work on yourself and learn more that you can so that you're taking care of yourself too, because that must be very painful.
Yeah, and I'm doing all that you said. I'm seeing a therapist, and I'm going to CHAD meetings and NAMI meetings and Twin Lakes Church mental health meetings. It's a family group. So I am doing all of that and sharing everything with my husband, of course. Yeah, I just did. I mean, it's your answer. We have no connection other than show up and knock on her door or send a card in the mail. But she asked us to just quit, please, texting her. And we were just sending we love you, we're thinking of you, if you need anything, pretty simple stuff that with hearts and, love, and that didn't work. It just stay away from me.
I'm so sorry to hear that. That sounds really painful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have heard that before. I think maybe, you know, like I said, just keep trying or give her space, or, you know, like I said, just making sure that they know that you love them. And I think you're working with your therapist is the best thing that you can do.
Yeah, I think too, you know, we have to remember, I have to remember too, that just like every person, even without mental health conditions, they're dealing with COVID and this whole experience. And then of course the elections that were going on, it's been, you know, affecting our country. So you take just your regular life and then add all that everybody else is experiencing. So I'm kind of taking that into consideration, that maybe that this whole COVID is, and then she's got the 2 kids studying at home, and that's a lot. And she's got a 13-year-old. So the 13-year-old starting to step up. She's almost 14, and she's now entering into a teenage stage with her daughter, which is a whole new chapter. So maybe there's a lot of stress going on in her life, just as you just mentioned. So, but the therapist suggested just let her go, let her be, you know, and work on yourself. So that's what we're doing. I just didn't know if you saw it differently, since you have been somebody who's been in that same position, like our daughter.
I think what working with your therapist is the best thing you can do, and it's hard for me to say this, but if people don't want to get treatment, like I chose, and that's what I think is I chose this. Nobody forced me, and so I think working with your therapist sounds like a really good step and journey that you're doing, and I hope that maybe she'll turn around at some point. I really do.
Thank you.
Maggie, you commented on the pain of the episode during your story. We're wondering if mania felt so good that you did not want to take your meds, but rather go back and feel the elation of mania, your relationship to God, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. And mania, such a complicated thing because it can definitely start, for me, it could start and get elation and excitement and feeling this connection that I've never felt before, but it doesn't stay there for me. It goes into psychosis, and then it kind of will dip down into some like awful feelings, and I think they call that mixed state. So my mania never stays there. It goes to something pretty uncomfortable and awful. And so I took them. I didn't ever stop taking my meds. That I had mania even when I was on lithium at the time. But then I found a new drug that really stops the mania. So I have colleagues that have had mania that they don't want to take the drugs for. And a lot of times that's because they can function in that manic state, but I can't. I get so manic that it turns into psychosis that I have to take meds because it's like when I go into psychosis and trying to recover from that, it's really difficult. So that's what keeps me on my meds. And I think it's harder for those that can operate in mania that maybe have trouble being med compliant because of that.
Are you still going through treatment today, and do you still experience symptoms?
That's a yes. And I will have to go through treatment for probably the rest of my life, because it was so severe. I currently I'm on an antidepressant and antipsychotic is what my treatment entails of. And I've been on at least 2 meds for 26 years. I've always been on at least 2. So I see a psychiatrist. I also have a therapist. I have a couples therapist. I had a life coach for a while. So it's kind of like a whole team of things that I will continue to have to do. The symptoms that I also struggle with anxiety, and I don't take meds for anxiety. And so that's the one that I struggle with the most. I will have some minor depressive episodes for sure. I mean, just a few months ago, I had a weekend that I couldn't get out of bed. I was pretty down, but because I'm on antidepressants, it's usually I can come out of it, with some action steps. But the medications keep me in the normal range, but I do struggle with anxiety, and I see a therapist who specifically works with anxiety.
Did you experience a loss in friendships when you had your episodes and their aftermath?
Yeah. I felt after my episode when I was 26, I wanted nothing to do with my friends when I became manic. I don't know why. When I got manic, I just I didn't understand people. I wanted to be in this, really manic world. When I came out of it, then I was like, oh, and I had to make a lot of apologies to friends because I wasn't very nice to them when I was manic. And so, one of the things I can tell you that living with a mental illness is a very lonely journey. And I have wonderful friends, but they don't really know what it feels like to live with a mental illness. And so, I do feel very alone at times because I can't really talk about my symptoms or whatever with my friends. I mean, they're very nice and great friends, but it is a very lonely journey because you have a lot of feelings that you don't understand.
This one you can answer only if you're comfortable, but does your insurance cover all of this treatment and how do you cope with the expenses?
That's a great question. I'm very lucky that I got insurance through my job. I've been at my job almost 10 years and I have great insurance. And that's one of the reasons I stay with my job is because the insurance is so good. So um, they pay, and most insurance right now, because of the parity law, like they have to pay for mental health treatment. I'm sure NAMI has maybe resources on that, but yeah, my insurance pays for my psychiatrist, it pays for my therapist, does not pay for my life coach. That was an expense that has come kind of as I've made more money that I felt like I wanted that. So all my mental health treatment has been covered. Before I had this job, I remember I had what's that called? Cobra. I worked at Pete's Coffee for a year just to get health insurance. This is before the Affordable Care Act. And then I had Cobra. So having insurance has been a huge priority for me. And I'm really excited because of the Affordable Care Act that passed a few years ago. Protecting pre-existing conditions is the most important thing that we can do to help those living with mental illness because that is a really big thing. So I know that there's also, Medicaid and those who can't afford it. So I think insurance is a huge battle right now because there's some that are not great and there's some that are good. But it's one of the reasons I've stayed with my job is that the insurance was so good. And that was a priority for me.
Did you find value engaging with peers who have similar conditions?
Yes, absolutely. There's this wonderful organization in Sacramento called Stop Stigma Sacramento. And what they do is they reached out to the community to get people who live with mental illness. And you come and they train you. And then they train you to speak about your illness. And then you go out to the community and speak. And through that organization, I finally met other people living with mental illness who had found solutions for their illness. And it's been really rewarding talking to people that also have a mental illness. It's really fun to just be honest. Like we'll sit around and we're like, what meds are you taking? Oh, this is what I'm taking. Okay, cool. And so I think the hardest part is that they're hidden throughout our communities. There's a lot of people like me that live with mental illness that are just trying their best to be in the community. So if you can meet up with those people, it's really exciting. So I'm sure NAMI has maybe groups that you guys can do that with.
Can you repeat the name of that organization one more time?
It's called Stop Stigma Sacramento. It's a wonderful program, and maybe Santa Cruz could develop something like that. It's one of the best things that happened to me and it connected me with other people that live with the mental illness.
And yes, just to clarify, we do have peer support groups 3 times a week.
My daughter with hypomania has always been super creative, huge reader, but has lost a lot of her creativity and focus since meds came on board. In your experience, will that creativity come back or lost to keeping her stable on meds?
So I've heard that a lot. And for me, my meds did not take away my creativity. And I don't know, I mean, just to be completely honest, I was on lithium for many, many years. And then I switched over to an antipsychotic that I take. And it didn't take away my creativity. I think, you know, the side effects sometimes I take my antipsychotic, I take it at night and it has some sedative effects, but I take it before I go to bed. So I know that there could be some medications that are more sedative. So I think maybe the important thing would be to work with somebody's doctor because maybe it's not the right med for them. You know, maybe there's another medication that's better, or maybe it's a timing issue of when you take your medication. So I think that the side effects are very difficult, but for me, I was able to work through them and still be creative on medication. So it is possible.
We had another question asking just about your side effects that you've experienced with medication, if you ever experienced lower energy levels or feeling over medicated, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, so when I was 16 and first put on lithium, I would get sick like every day. You throw up a lot because you're adjusting to it. I was also on another medication that made my hair fall out. And I think anytime you go to med, your body's adjusting to it. And so it took a few weeks for me to adjust to it, and eventually those side effects went away. But when you're on a medication, it changes your body, I feel like, and you're always going to be working on the side effects because they can be really difficult. And I know when I went off the lithium and I went on antipsychotic, I definitely gained weight. A lot of other issues came up too, a hard time getting up in the morning. But the thing I try to remember about the side effects, I try to remember why I'm taking the drug and what I'm trying to do. And so although the side effects are bad, I go, if I take this drug, I'm trying to accomplish this in my life. I'm trying to finish, get my degree. I'm trying to do well in my job. I'm trying to buy a house. And so I focus on the things that I want to do, and somehow it makes me deal with the side effects in a better way because my focus is somewhere else. But the side effects are something that everybody living with a mental illness that we have to deal with until maybe someday they figure out something better. That's kind of, I'm holding out hope that the side effects will get better.
Those are all the questions I have. Thank you so much, Maggie. Your openness is really helpful.
Thank you, Maggie. So does anybody else have other questions? I have your book here. So we have another minute. I just wanted to read this paragraph you wrote. When you're blinded by mania, it becomes really hard to distinguish what's real. In the beginning, the mania convinced me that my life as I knew it was not real compared to the new life or dimension that I would be going to. Life as I knew it had no substance. Nothing about it was as I had perceived it. My family wasn't real, friends weren't real, sights and sounds weren't real. Objects weren't even real. Now in the hospital, I didn't know what was real, or more important, who I was. I had no solid ground to stand on. The miracle of this to me is that it changed. That you could come from this state of mind to recovery where you are today. And that is the story of hope that you give to us. And I'm so grateful because family members can hold the hope for loved ones when they're in a frame of mind where they forget. I just have to be patient. I will get better, and it might take a year. So thank you. There other comments or questions?
Lots of thank yous in the chat.
Do you want to say anything back, Maggie?
Oh, well, I just want to thank you guys so much for having me, and thank you so much, Carol, for all the kind words about my book. My book took me 5 years to write it. It was a labor of love. I did it because I really wanted to get that message out, and it's a complicated message, that there is hope, but sometimes it's going to take a while and it'll take a little bit of work, but there is hope. And sorry, my cat just came in. And it's not for everybody, you have to kind of enjoy memoirs, but if you enjoy, I get emails from people every once in a while who say that it made them feel better about what they were going through. And that to me is worth it. If we all lift each other up and say, hey, it's okay. You're going through this, I'm going through this. We're going to get through it, and you could still live the life that you want and that you deserve.
All right.
Okay.
Well, we finished a little bit early. You did a fabulous job. We learned a lot from you, and I'm so glad you came back to Santa Cruz via Zoom. And everybody out there in NAMI land, all of us on the team, the staff, the board, we love you. Stay connected. And thank you, Maggie. And let's all give her a shaking hands of applause.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Stay safe, everybody.